too.
Well, good morning or afternoon. We're on that cusp of morning, afternoon. And welcome to the Watchdogs. Today, we are going to talk about a very important topic to a number of communities. But today, without Julius Hall, who is handling some things, and we wish him and his family well at this moment. And we hope to have him back with us next Saturday. So I am Robert Bryant, the co-host of Watchdog. This morning or afternoon, we have the opportunity to recognize mental health through a conversation about mental health in the African American community and other communities. It is such an important topic because some of us may know, may agree, and may disagree with what I'm about to say, but in the African American community or Black community, we sometimes position mental health as a taboo topic in our families. And so we have two professionals with us today who understand the topic, who work in the topic, who live with this topic, and who advocate for mental health issues every day. And so I'll let ask our two guests to introduce themselves, and we'll dive right into the topics.
Thank you, Robert, for having us on today. Renetta, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hello?
Yes, we can see and hear you. Would you like to introduce? Yes.
I'm kind of in an awkward area. Yeah, that's why I keep.
Yeah, you're kind of choppy there.
Hello?
If your Wi-Fi button is on, you may have to turn that off. Okay, Shante, we'll probably start with you so she can get a better, hello, Wilmington Allen, so we can get her a better signal there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Robert, again for having me as a guest. My name is Shante McLaughlin. I live with bipolar 2 with psychosis. What that means is I go from mania to depression, and I can also escalate to hearing things, seeing things, sleeping outside, matted hair, all of those beautiful things that come with psychosis, which almost looks like schizophrenia. And I'm mental health, criminal justice, and homeless lives reform advocate. I work, well, I have a company called C. Louise, and with my company, one of my clients is Recovery Consultants of Atlanta. And with Recovery Consultants of Atlanta, we impact mental and behavioral health services. And what that looks like is having a clinic to address, and I'm their communication specialist. So delivering communications and working with other organizations that may want to be impacted by mental health services. Anything else,
Okay.
Rob? Am I leaving anything out?
Well, I not at this moment. We're trying to get Brunetta connected. If you can contact her, just let her know. She may either want to get from under Wi-Fi or find a very strong signal. But we'll go ahead and move forward. And when she joins us, we'll get her introduction. But one of
Okay,
the
and I'll
things
share.
that, oh,
She's
go ahead.
actually at a retreat. She's actually at a
Okay.
retreat
Okay.
that's for people who live with drug and substance abuse. She's never done drugs or well, that's not part of her story, and she doesn't live with mental health.
Right.
But at the retreat, they have, I want to say, 30 to 40 individuals that they're taking out into nature to help them with recovery.
And if we could circle back and talk about that, one of the things that I'm an advocate for is moving away from incarcerating individuals who don't commit nonviolent crimes. What does that mean? That means anybody who may have substance abuse concern, why would we jail them instead of rehabilitating? And what you just talked about is a great solution. And that is finding ways to rehabilitate individuals instead of putting them in a position where they cannot recover. And so I think we should circle back around to talk about that because I think that's such an important piece to this conversation. And I'm glad to hear that we have those types of things going on. But if you could really quick, tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into this passion for mental health awareness.
Okay. So I've been advocating for almost 20 years now. When I was in well, actually going back to high school, I would do things around homeless shelters, around marginalized communities, whether it was helping to create book drives, planting trees, things like that. And so in college, I went to college for journalism with PR. I originally wanted to be a lawyer. However, I would just volunteer at agencies and it kind of called to me. And then after college, I remember feeling really empty. Like I was working at a very secure company. I was living in this 1,500 square foot apartment, about to buy a house. I was like 23 years old, car paid off, financially stable. And I just felt really, really empty. And I would have little crying issues where I might get in a relationship and we break up. And it may be 2, 3, 4 days straight, and I'm crying every day, but not a healthy cry. Like I'm in the same clothes, I'm on my sofa. The only thing I'm managing to do is get up and go to the bathroom, and then I'm in the same place. Or going back to being 16 and pregnant and depressed and suicidal because I'm the cheerleader and a straight A student, and it's not supposed to happen to me. Um, because so, we think of mental health as this thing where if you look a certain way, dress a certain way, act a certain way, do certain things, it's not supposed to happen to you as a happening. But it's no different than cancer or HIV and AIDS or, well, not necessarily that one, but you can be born with it. It's not a thing that just, well, it progresses. It can progress,
Mm-hmm.
but we make it into this thing that you can just snap out of it, or it's your fault because you shouldn't have tolerated this when it's a chemical imbalance. And the worst that it got was 12 years ago, I got diagnosed with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar disorder. And 5 years ago, my doctor said I was too high functioning in 2016 and removed me from my medication. And that ended up with me walking the streets, talking to myself, sleeping outside again, which looked like after I got treatment, it looked like me being diagnosed with bipolar 2 with psychosis, which is my current diagnosis.
And so, if you could walk us through, this how that looked. And so I know sometimes you mentioned, that takes you from sometimes managing multi-million-dollar accounts to, like you said, being out on the streets and being homeless.
Yes. So I'll get paranoid. Like I may,
Mhm.
and let me return to something you said earlier too about
Mhm.
non-violent offenders versus violent offenders. So
Sure.
certain medications can trigger you to become violent. It's a side effect of the medication. Certain medications, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder for years. Schizoaffective disorder is the illusions of grandiosity. So, when I was in college, I worked as a waitress at Puff Daddy's restaurant. I met 5 billionaires in my life. My background was radio advertising sales. So I've managed celebrities' accounts when they've had nightclubs and promotional companies and things like that. So I
Mhm.
say all of that to say, when I went before a doctor, although I could show, I put this person on tour with this celebrity and I've done this and I've done that, they labeled me with schizoaffective disorder without doing
Mhm.
any thorough investigation. It was just like the thought that if you live with mental health, you can only be a janitor, which at some point I could only be a janitor. You can only work in warehouses, where at some point I could only work in warehouses. But they label you and they limit you because they don't
Mhm.
believe that you can do more because of the mental health. And they think that you haven't done more. Like they didn't even believe that I had a degree because of the mental health diagnosis. She's making up, she, in my file it said, oh, she's a consistent liar. She lied and said she had a degree. She lied and said that she worked for Puff Daddy. This is something that you can verify just by doing a background check and pulling someone's wage earnings. So it's not
Right.
asking for the miracles to come down. It's just something as simple as just do your homework as a healthcare provider to see if these labels are sufficient. Because what happens is with the schizoaffective disorder and the schizophrenia disorder, they gave me, I don't even know what medication they were giving me right now, but that caused it. But one of the medications that they were giving me caused the hearing voices. So normally with psychosis, I see things that aren't there. The
Mhm.
hearing voices comes if my medications are altered. Like if something that I'm taking, if they like, I had some deaths in the family last year during COVID time, and my doctor was afraid of me relapsing. And so he increased the dosage of one of my medicines drastically. And I started hearing voices, but I don't hear voices when I'm off medication. I see things that aren't there.
Right.
And so it's like when it comes to the violent thing, I remember being in the hospital and they gave me a shot of Haldol in my arm, although I've never taken Haldol, although um it's not something that it's not a part of my diagnosis. It made so I remember this girl kept following me around room to room and I kept calling her a different name and she scratched me. She clawed me and broke
Wow.
skin. And I just immediately choked her and I was choking her out. And there were orderlies and they didn't say anything because we were being monitored and they were giving us an experimental drug just to see how we reacted. And they didn't stop me. I mean, it was a room full of people and I'm choking this young girl out for scratching me. And I mean, she started turning colors and then I let her go. But it's a side effect of the medication. Like if you look it up, it says may cause violence. And so it's like when it comes to the prescribing, I'll say this too. When I was advocating prior to being arrested for mothers advocating for the mentally ill, it started because of this woman named Candida Summerlin and her mom, Rachel Summerlin, advocating for her to be released from jail. The police were called on her while she was in psychosis. She was standing in the middle of a lake fully clothed,
Wow.
in psychosis, delusional, standing in the middle of a lake. The police came. Instead of calling someone to stabilize her, they tried to arrest her. So she took off running, jumped in her car. The police jumped in front of the car, trying to stop her. She hit one of the police officers, broke her leg. She's in prison for 20 years now, and they stabilized her when she got to prison. This is a girl who has
Mm.
who actually was at Georgia State at the same time as me, working. I think she got her degree. Her family are accomplished to the point where she's met the Pope. World traveled, articulate, intelligent, African American woman of color. And I'm sure if it would have been a counterpart, it may have been treated differently. But the mental health and prison pipeline is so correlated, but it's often not talked about.
Yeah.
They
And
traffic us to prisons.
that's the sad part about it. One of the things that I am always concerned about is if we see a mass shooting or we see something that is abnormal in the news that we don't typically see every day, we go to this conversation about mental health. And that's problematic. One of the things, and I'm going to share a personal story in a moment, but one of the things that we've got to start doing better, especially in our African American community, is monitoring mental health as equally as we monitor physical health. It's just that important. The body is made up of three pieces: emotional, mental, and physical. And we always focus on the physical, the cancer, the HIV, the common cold. But what about the mental health? And I'm sharing a personal story. I hold a PhD, a doctorate degree. And people say, well, you got it together, you got it going on, you're smart, whatever that means, great. But I came back home to be a caretaker for my mother who has Alzheimer's disease. And what we're going to talk about now is the spectrum of mental health. That can be very mild to maybe very severe, however you want to view that spectrum. But when you're dealing with Alzheimer's disease, if anybody knows, especially our viewers, you understand how severe that can be on someone's emotional capacity, especially if they're a caregiver. And so here it is, a woman with a master's degree who raised you, who taught kindergarten, first grade for 30 years, now can't even understand what a spoon is, what it means to put on a shoe, how to eat. And so that takes a toll on you as an individual. And then we also have the other part of that is a second person that I'm caregiving for, which is my dad, who is going into his 94th year of living. So you do this by yourself, right? And that's what I'm in. And I tell people all the time, most people have another sibling, a family member, what have you, to help in this process of caregiving for one. But I'm one versus two, not to mention one who has Alzheimer's. And so what I found when I came back, I gave up my career, moved back here to Savannah, and I tried to do it by myself. And that shifted it shifted my being in so many ways, to the point where I didn't realize what was going on until I started seeking therapy. And that's another thing we need to talk about too, is we all need to figure out a way to help find out professional help us digest things. So I went and found therapy and was diagnosed with depression and didn't even realize I was in that status. So what that looked like was going into antidepressants, which I despise medicine to this day. I'm more of a herbal, natural medicine type person, but it's very real. And I don't think in our community, we think a lot about, we might be okay right now, but you may go through some type of situation that will really shift who you are as a person. And if you don't monitor that like you monitor your physical health, it could lead to some very serious issues.
I agree. And the woman, when you first logged on, someone typed in something about triggers. And, when it comes to mental health, you never know what triggers you. I know when I first had my first breakdown, if I heard crickets, literally being outside in nature, hearing crickets chirping would trigger me to break down into these, sobbing, tears everywhere, like uncontrollable crying fits, just from hearing a cricket chirping. So you never know what triggers you. I shared with someone the other day, Brunetta, actually, we were facilitating a group. We facilitate a group at the Salvation Army every Monday. And one of the gentlemen didn't want to be there. And so I shared how we were playing, what were we playing? No, someone had sang a gospel song. And a lot of times people think, oh, you can be healed, just pray and things like that. And I'm not saying that that's not the answer, whatever works for you. You know, I
Right.
feel the same way about mental health that I do about religions. If praying to Allah keeps you from hitting old ladies upside the head and stealing bags, do that. So whatever works for you. But when it comes to mental health, if someone were molested, if someone were beaten, if someone were made to eat their feces, you hear all types of stories by someone in the church, then listening to a gospel song may trigger them. So whereas you think, oh, let me take this person to church, they'll feel better. They may believe in God, they may believe in that same religion, and they may be willing to walk down that path. However, they may be triggered. And with mental health, we deal with that trigger, or with people, humanity, society. We deal with that trigger like that's who they are. So you take them to church, they lash out and cuss you out. And now, oh, they got a bad attitude. They don't believe in God. They cuss you out. And now that becomes how you view that person and how they view themselves and their self-esteem. And all that happened is they were triggered. So when we think about domestic violence, and I'm not a proponent of any of it. However, I get out of the judgment mode because you never know what triggers someone. And when we interact with it like that, we're able to heal the mental health traumas. Like there's a tribe in Africa, I can't think of the name of it right now, but when something happens and someone acts out, they surround them and they say a lot of affirmations and everything that's good about them. And they have like a 2% crime rate.
Wow.
So there are solutions. It's just, are we willing to be that? Are we willing to be that level of grace, that level of compassion, and practice that level of love? And a lot of communities are, and it starts with us trying on some things that may be helpful and healthy. So
Yeah.
communities over cages, in the words of Women on the Rise.
And I'm totally for that. I just wish that, and we're going to play a video in a moment, but I just wish that we as a community would get there. And what I mean by get there is we are in a position as Americans, United States of America, we think punishment, we think capitalism, we think cash. And that's all the criminal justice system has turned into, is a cash cow machine. It's no longer about rehabilitating. It's no longer about how can we make this person better than what they were. It's about what can we make from them. And that means incarcerating them so we can make our jail more money. Because if you don't know this, for everybody they have in there, they make money. As a matter of fact, I saw where Hall County, Georgia, they were low on inmates. Like, who the hell says that? Like, that's crazy. Why can't we get
40
in the
to
business?
60,000.
So
40 to 60,000 a year.
Yeah. Why can't we get in the business of rehabilitating people? That's what it should be about. That's what I thought it was about. But it's more about, money. And what does that say about us as a culture? You just mentioned a tribe in Africa where their whole ideology is about supporting and growth and development and making sure a person is stronger, better, and grow. But guess what? When we incarcerate somebody for bullshit, and excuse my language, we now are feeding, housing, giving cable to, light bill, and we are the taxpayers paying that. And we elect these jackasses that go in there and keep perpetuating this dumb stuff.
Who told you that? Have you wait. Let's slow down. Who told you that we were housing and feeding and cable and all of that? We don't get cable. They give you 23 hours of solitary confinement, 1 hour of free time. In that 1 hour, they're supposed to allow you to watch TV, but they usually have you out long enough for maybe 1 or 2 commercial breaks. Then they put you back in the cell and document it. They round up that you've been out for an hour, but you're really in solitary confinement most of the day. And when it comes to the food, they give you moldy food that may be bologna and bread, or you get 3 pieces of bread with two things of peanut butter. They match they put your Kool-Aid in the bread, in a little packet. and they may give you a cup of water so that you can actually drink the Kool-Aid. So I'm not saying there's no cost, but when people think about jail, they act as if you're getting this lavish meal or something like that. They give you these soy products that you wouldn't feed to a dog. And then in some some prisons, I was talking to someone who was incarcerated at a prison in Florida, and he said that they give them estrogen every day. I forgot what day of the week. They give them an actual chicken breast, soy products, but soy is estrogen. So, or too much soy can cause it impacts your estrogen levels. So they gave him a chicken breast one day out the week. So all week he really doesn't eat. He exchanges his food so that he can get more than one piece of chicken that one day. So that's why, especially our brown and black men, when they come home from prison, a lot of them have feminine traits because they've been exposed, their estrogen levels have been increased. So now they're developing breasts. Their hair is looking like they're not growing as much hair, like things like that. And it impacts everything.
Wow. That's crazy.
Sexuality, it impacts, just everything. Yep. So I think it goes deeper than what it's, like the Bush family and Ted Turner are some of the largest, they own the most privatized prisons. Like, how do you have a president who owns a privatized prison? Here in Atlanta, we were advocating for one of the jails to be closed to Women on the Rise, and they said that the jail is used to leverage funding for other buildings. And with the jail, it was created around the time of the Olympics. So if you spit on the ground, if you jaywalk, if you were sleeping outside, then instead of getting a ticket or citation, they actually jailed you. And at one point around that time, because this is what they created to impact the homeless population. So at one point, there were 600 people being housed in this jail. And now it's about 30 people. And they just passed another law to make it so that the jail would be able to be, instead of repurposing the jail, they're going to allow more people to be housed there. It's going to be used for multiple counties to be able, because this is a jail that they use out of, one of the city councilman's mouths. He said, we use this jail as credit for our other buildings. So what would you suggest? How can we make millions of dollars for our other buildings? Because closing this jail would cost us millions. So I said, I'm sure the slave owners said the same thing to the slaves.
Yeah.
Closing ending slavery is going to cost us millions of dollars.
I'm just shocked no one has used scripture to try to justify. We use scripture for everything, but we're going to move on back. We're going to go down. But what's alarming? What's alarming to me? You mentioned this privatized prison out there. Mm-hmm. I don't think people are awakened. We talk about being woke. Okay, let's have a awakened moment, a woke moment. The reason why people want to privatize prisons, and I don't have personal experience, but I have family experience with what I'm about to talk about. I have a family member who has gone from a state-run prison, which is run by the state, to a private prison, which is run by individual, as you mentioned. That's a cash cow, because all of the money that they make off of that, the phone calls, the machines with all the food in them. I mean, this is a moneymaker. It's a huge moneymaker. It's one of the reasons why I want people, especially in the brown communities, to realize there's a reason why we are talking about charter and private schools. If you don't really understand what's going on, folks, it's like this here. We're building a pipeline, or they are building a pipeline of segregation by privatizing certain schools, creating charter schools, because that's what we're going to do. We're now going to funnel a pathway to these private prisons. So we're going to use the public school systems. We're going to use our brown folks. We're going to keep them where they are by zip code and make sure that guess what? Put you in my privatized prison and make my money.
Well, let's not talk about the children who are in foster care. 1 in 4, when they aging out is 18 to 21, I believe, depending on where you're at. They end up going to prison. 1 in 4. And let's not talk, I've dealt with defects. One, I just recently found out, well, let me rephrase this. Someone told me this. I haven't seen this in writing myself, but I was told that the Department of Treasury is who pays for parental rights to be terminated. So that looks like once your rights are terminated as a parent, then you can't get them back. So if you go to jail for a day, a minor speeding violation, and they take your children and they're in defects and they find any reason to keep them in the system, and you go back and forth, maybe you can't get off, maybe you're underemployed, maybe you're between jobs or something, but they have all of these stipulations. Maybe you have 3 kids sleeping in a room with bunk beds and an individual bed. That kind of thing is not, you can only have 2 children in a room, and they can only, well, let me rephrase it. It depends on that as well. Because when they were trying to help me, I qualified for a Section 8 voucher, but I only qualified for a 2-bedroom apartment. And if I had a 2-bedroom apartment, because I have 2 boys, one that's now 4 and one that's 16, and then there's me, I wouldn't have been able to get my children back because that's not considered adequate housing. The 4-year-old had to have his own room as part of the provisions of me getting him back. And it doesn't work for me to have my 16-year-old son sleeping in a room with me. So I wouldn't have been able, and I had to be able to afford this a year after facing 20 years in prison. So, you get out there, and I'm glad that I have the mindset and the exposure that I have. But can you imagine how many women have lost their kids in the system based off of something as simple as going to jail on a traffic stop and having your parental rights just terminated? There are women who I was in jail with who have been jailed just because they didn't take them to trial and they live with mental health, 2 years on criminal trespassing charges. So they've lost their children. Their children are in the system. Their children are in foster care, and their children are set up to have, their lives taken from them and for them to go into the prison pipeline. And that's the conversation that we should be having that we're not having enough.
And if you could share more about that, I know, and I don't want to force you to share your story, but our society, we talk about women. Our society has done a terrible job of treating people who are not WAS, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. We're gonna want, if you don't identify in that population, we have a track record, a history of not being fair to individuals, especially women. And when you add the label, when we talk about identities, you add the label of African American women, it gets a little more dicier. I mean, hell, we have never seen a African American woman as a Supreme Court justice and in a number of other roles. But talk about that and how mental health plus African American women plus prison equals destruction.
So for me, my doctor said I was too high functioning. I was managing a multi-million-dollar account. I was working at the radio station. I was on my way to Ferguson to protest, and I was Cub Scout secretary. And she said I was too high functioning. I no longer needed my medication. Same doctor refused to give me a crisis management plan. Same doctor refused to put me on my medication after I was sleeping on the streets. Same doctor, one time when I was arrested and taken to jail, they had me, or taken to the hospital, they had me sign a form saying that I would be willing to be used inside of medical research. Same doctor who started sending me Haldol, which is a medication that I've never taken in my life. However, she wouldn't give me any of my previous medications that she knows stabilizes me. She gave me an experimental drug. So in saying that, once I didn't comply anymore, they released me to a shelter, which is illegal because you're supposed to be released to housing. And I sit on, I'm secretary on a council with this. And I also am a member of the Lived Experience Advisory Board to the National Council on the Homeless. So in saying that, you're supposed to house first, provide mental health services, drug and treatment services second. So you are not supposed to discharge people to the streets or discharge people to these shelters. You're supposed to work on getting housing because they have resources in to work on getting housing. But it creates the demise, because if you're in the hospital or you're in jail and you have children, what happens to your children?
Right.
And if you're releasing people to the streets and this is the other thing too, your medication belongs to the jail. So people don't know you've been incarcerated now for 6 months. They have you stabilized on medication. They release you to your home. Let's say you're being released to home. You have no insurance. Guess what? You're going to be right back in that position, because when they release you, your medication belongs to the jail, not to you. So they're not going to release you with a prescription. They're not going to release you with a doctor. They're just going to release you. That's why you have homeless people who have been incarcerated like 70 and 80 times, literally, for criminal trespassing. So I see when they refuse to take their meds, you're right. But sometimes taking the meds is like, I'm a pill pusher. Like, I believe in natural things, but I also believe that God, the scientists, made meds. So if those, now with that, such a sidebar. I think there's a disparity because we weren't, as people of color, we did not have the opportunity to have our own pharmaceutical corporations. So that's a different conversation. While we have all of these people who are incarcerated over marijuana and cocaine, where alcohol is legal. So and I say all of that very loosely because some of my political endeavors, but we have a lot of disparities, and it's because we're not in the communication, we're not in the conversation, we're not advocating for ourselves. We'd rather spend $200 on a pair of Jordans than going and spending $200 to join 4 to 6 organizations and pay membership dues to have a voice. So if we start advocating, start getting involved in our community, 2% of people run for public office. 2%. They told me during a training that it is more likely for you to be on an NBA or NFL team than it is for you to run for public office. So with the statistic, we need to get involved. We need to get involved on the side of public policy making. 12 years ago, I consulted with Senator Donzella James on public policy to impact mental well-being, but it's like something that you don't hear about because my name's not on any bill or any legislation. And now I'm involved with organizations where we're advocating for mothers to not be incarcerated while pregnant. And we're also advocating around extensive solitary confinement laws. Because right now, they throw you in solitary confinement as long as they want, for whatever reason. They can say you looked at them wrong. And now you're in solitary confinement for the next 6 months. So that's why they say that a lot of people go to jail without mental health and they come out with mental health. And it's exasperated if you already have a mental health diagnosis. In my situation, I remember feeling the dirt. Like, remember laying in my bed, feeling people over my body throwing dirt on me, being buried alive. And in reality, I was just laying in my bed. But I'd also been in solitary confinement, which was my cell. It hadn't let me out in about 5 weeks. So there's, so it just, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's just my experience with the despair of it and how it goes through the process of, you almost lose hope when you live with mental health. My first going with it, I applied to over 300 companies. I went from being a concert promoter and partner in a nightclub to not being able to get a job for being overqualified. And I applied to over 300 companies. And a friend referred me to be a janitor. I was able to work as a janitor for less than $2 an hour. And that helped me on my road to recovery, to live in a house with 2 roommates and to attend meetings because I didn't have insurance, although I'd never done drugs. So, and really quickly, that tribe, it's the Bantu tribes. I think it's the Bantu tribes of East Africa, and it's another tribe, South Africa. So it's very popular in the African culture in some of the tribes, or so I've read.
Speaking of, and this is a sidebar, but speaking of communities outside of the United States. I have a friend who lived in Costa Rica for a while. And I say that to say, we, and that's just America is an arrogant country. We're a very arrogant country. I've traveled to two different nations. I've been in Kuala Lumpur, which is in Malaysia. I've been in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And just to hear how we've been so damn nosy and gotten into their business. But I say all this, there are medications, natural medications that are in these countries and other countries like Costa Rica that will heal people. As you talked about that tribe, they have natural healing methods, but we are so damn capitalistic. We are about that money that we would rather hurt our own people to make a dollar rather than thinking that way. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
I agree, but you have to take in everything. So, for instance, in a Costa Rica or in Africa, you have to think about the climate. You have to think about geography, like just the land makeup, because some healing principles to nature. I say I don't have too many fears, but one of mine is the statistic that people with mental health live 25 years less than people who don't have mental health. And, that's kind of alarming. And so it's like, you hear my kids at the door. She locked the door. Now they're knocking.
She just don't kids over y'all. They control her life, so don't get alarmed.
They do. My kids run my life. If I open their door, they're gonna come in. They're gonna want to kiss on me. They're gonna want to hug on me. Then they're gonna tell me everything that I'm not doing, that I should be doing, such as why haven't I helped with breakfast? It's time to eat. Although grandma's in the house cooking breakfast and making coffee. You didn't do this morning. That's my kids. Why didn't you put my syrup on my pancakes? You didn't cut up my pancakes. Bobby's experienced breakfast with us, or Robert's experienced breakfast with us. He knows I'm not far off the mark, but I love it. I love being a mom. And so I think we mess with people's culture too much. We think that we are supposed to have an Anglo-Saxon cultural view. The only reason why Black people are getting murdered as much as they are is because of the cultural breakdown. And it gets a little ridiculous sometimes when some of my European, because of my cultural lack, sometimes with identifying all white people as European when all aren't from Europe. But, they have identified all of us as coming from Africa when all of us ain't from Africa. So say it like that. There's not enough cultural dialogue. There's not enough cultural understanding. When we start having these conversations, then we change the climate. We impact. We don't change. We impact the cultural conversations and the diverse inclusion, which is necessary and needed. And so we stop doing things like going to Africa and trying to tell them that women should behave like this, women shouldn't do this, or going to the Middle East and saying, how dare you do that? This is their culture. Like, I'm African American with 2 baby daddies. I wish somebody would have participated in arranged marriages for me back when I was a teenager, maybe not to an 80-year-old man. But now that I'm grown, my type is a lot older because of that stability that they bring. Ain't nobody thinking about a 401k, Bobby. We have this conversation all the time. Do they have employees with 401ks? Can they provide 401ks? Like, I love dating men who are in positions to hire people. And so I say that to say they usually come a little older. But I don't worry about a lot of the things. I don't have to worry about it. I have slept with my best friend, which may be a dialogue with some younger men. And not saying across the board, but there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything. There's some people who need to get certain things out of their system. We're dealing with and healing with different things on different levels. Sometimes people are like, oh, you just dated a narcissist. Guess what? He may have been molested, he may have to act out in this way. Like, we don't know what we're dealing with. He may have been raped. He may have been beaten. He just may have had a crazy ex-girlfriend. I know I've been that crazy ex-girlfriend to some of the guys I've dated, so it's like, we don't know who people are healing from. And we want
Right.
to put everyone into this nice box, wrap them up, and this is your package. And the reality is, we just don't know. You never, these kids done found the keys. They're like, both locks.
I love it.
I hear them at the door with the key. Both locks are locked. Y'all aren't getting to me.
I love it. You're right, though.
They
And
have
I'm going to come
found
back
the
to this in
key.
a moment. But when we, I love it. When you think about in the LGBT plus community, and you take that identity and you mix it with the African American community, and then we add on to the church, how
Mm.
that can just be a whole bottle of mess because we're raised in our community to do things in a certain way. And I'm not about to, no shade, no tea, no shade, as they say. Um, but even on one side of my family, the expectation is you grow up, you're right. Everybody does have a story. You grow up, you go to high school, you go to college, you get married, you have babies, you live your life. I'm not going to. One thing about me, and if people around me know, I don't subscribe to anything that I don't want to subscribe to because I'm me. And that's the thing we've got to do better in our communities is accept people for where they are, understand their story, and let their story be their story. I never forget, and this is a very, very mild case, but my nephew, my youngest nephew, who I so wanted to go to Georgia Southern, and hard-headed as he is, he did not. That was my first traumatic experience. He went to Valdosta State, but then he realized this isn't for me. I want to go to the military. Well, his mom and I were just like, oh my God, what? But then my mom at the time, before Alzheimer's had hit, she said, let the boy live his life. It's his life. And that meant a lot. I never sat back and thought about, we have these expectations for people. We want everyone to be well and prosper, but let them do it in their own way, in their own context. And, as we talk
1
about,
second. It's a family gathering outside the door right now. Let me.
oh, they think you're dying. That's not, I'll keep going with this. But we've got to step away from what we want for people personally and on their journey and step into what they think is best, what is healthy for them, and support that journey. And so I think we as a community have got to do a better job of developing narratives for people that does not fit the narrative they want to live, as long as it's a healthy narrative. We could talk more about, how people hit pitfalls and challenges in their life, but we got to stop being nosy and be supportive of people. One of the things
Right.
I've heard you
So
talk about, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say this whole thing. I saw my 6-year-old son with his phone in his hand, and my phone's been going off this entire time. It's been a group chat with my siblings. And what's there is I called my little brother this morning, who's a calculus teacher. He's an Omega. He was working
Yeah,
on
that's
his
pretty messed
master's
up.
degree. He's starting a group home. He's married, 3 kids, and he has to be the world's most current person in the world. And I'm saying that out loud for him to hear this because he saw my hair and he started laughing. And because I'm not married and I'm in my 40s, the question is always, is she a lesbian? And so
You should say
they're
yes.
calling me on group family chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
trying to
there's
get
no place to
in.
it.
They're trying to get in while I'm on a show just to ask that question, which the answer is I'm not. However, my sexuality is my sexuality. Last time I checked, I didn't wake up in bed with any of my siblings.
That'd be problematic.
So I get to choose, and I choose men. However, people need to leave and allow them to be where they're at, because something that people didn't realize a couple of years ago, you could get a check for being a member of the LGBTQIA community. It was what was it called? So when the transgender community, male, female, or female to male, it was, I can't remember what it was called, but it was not borderline personality disorder, but it's an actual diagnosis that they would give you. You'd qualify for Social Security, and the government paid for the gender reassignment. So in saying that, it's one of those conversations where it's like, mind your own business. Let people be. Stop concerning
Yeah.
yourself with things that don't concern you. Even in mental health, let people be. When you see people walking on the streets, if one of your former classmates Either direct them to a service, put some money in their cup, give them a hot meal, or mind your damn business. If we're
That's it.
not going to be a part of the solution, do not continue to be a part of the problem, because
Right.
we all got our own stuff to deal with. And if you somebody who ain't dealing with nothing, you probably ain't up to nothing. And it doesn't mean that every day is gloom and doom. And it also doesn't mean that every day is a bed of roses. But to get to that next level, you're going to have to level up. And it's never comfortable. Even in the comfort, you could be, it's so great. And guess what? It might be great, but it's going to look different. So
Yeah.
allow people to level up, you level up, and mind your own damn business. So,
As we talk about the trans community, one of my favorite shows, and I encourage everyone to watch it. I don't care what your views are. Actually, I don't care. I really don't care what your views are. Um, Watch Pose. Pose was well put together. It talked about the LGBT plus community in the ballroom setting in New York back in I want to say the 80s. But recently I watched an episode last night where one of the characters, Pray Tell, went back to the church. And I hope I don't piss nobody off, but if I do, go get your own healing. I'm not responsible for your level of emotion. But went back to the church, and he was talking about him dying. At that time, there was no HIV medications. But he went back to the church, and then the pastor of the church, who was married, they had a conversation, and Pray Tell told him, what he told him, and then the pastor was willing to leave his wife to go be with Pray Tell. But I said it to say people develop all these stigmas and these structures and all this crazy stuff, and they make us operate in a way that we're not willing to operate. How do we move away from that? And as you said, either you're going to be a part of that solution or you're going to be a part of that problem. And if we are a community like others, and I'm talking very directly to the African American community, which I belong and identify as, we've got to do a better job of getting out of people's business. I almost said the wrong word. We do the
personal
best
business.
job. We do the best job of worrying about what's going on next door, but yet your house ain't clean. We do the best job of knowing what Barbara down the street doing, but got the same mess going on in your house. We got to stop doing that.
Right. Because it impacts mental health. When I was suicidal at 16, 15, one of those ages, I've shared the story and I've healed from it so much, I don't even remember how old I was. But I remember being suicidal and having my stomach pumped and being institutionalized for a month. And that was all inside of people gossiping and talking about me. At the time, I wasn't fit. I wasn't mentally fit. I wasn't I wasn't emotionally fit to handle gossip. But it all shapes and prepares you. Right now, I'm running for city council. If they pull out any of my background, they can. There's nothing that I've ever done, good or bad, I'm willing to live up to. And if I wouldn't have gone through that at 16, I don't think that it would have allowed me to run right now, because I would have crumbled. I'd be like, oh, they're going to say that this happened when I was at the radio station. They're going to say that this person, there's this time when I was in college that I took that trip. I don't give a shoot.
Right.
Let them say what they're going to say, because, throw your stone in my glass house. Let's see who ends up with the pieces, but it's like, so what? I'm transparent, but that's also because that works well for my mental health. Back when I was hiding things, when I was living in shame, when I was living inside of other people's opinions, that is so much stress, so much anxiety, so much tension, those panic attacks, like not being able to be with myself, not being able to look myself in the eyes, not being able to look in the mirror without hyperventilating, and healing looks how healing looks. Like I just woke up and threw on a shirt because I wasn't sure if the alarm on the house, and I'm at my parents' house, didn't know the code. So it was like, I was just laying in the bed. Then it's time to be on the show. Figure out where I'm going to go sit at. But I've had to get this point, because society used to tell me that if I wasn't perfect, when I was a size 2, I wasn't thick enough. When I had perfect skin at the time, it wasn't perfect. When I would be in my 4-inch heels. They weren't expensive enough. Like, it's always enough. And feeling like I never measured up enough kept me running in circles. And at any given time, that same conversation will come up. It's just I get to choose. I get to choose if I walk in my house and see the lines in my carpet, or if I see a Kool-Aid spot. And, well, we don't drink Kool-Aid in my house, but if there's a drink spot and I've scrubbed it out, or if Gregory's decided to put his markers, his washable markers on the sofa, and now I've scrubbed them and there's a big bleed spot for markers, like, I get to choose what kind of mom I get to be. Do I have a house or do I have a home? I get to choose what works best for my mental health. People will say things like, if you clean up and everything's not in order, that's an expression of where you are in your life. And someone told me, or it's an expression you've been resting and taking care of yourself. You haven't been putting all your time into folding clothes and making sure that everything had its place. You took the time to rest and take care of yourself. But you get to choose your perspective on how you look at your own mental health and what works for you. And some days, laying in bed all day works well for me, because some other days I may only sleep 4 or 5 hours a day. So you make your choice and decide what works best for your mental and emotional health. That's self-awareness and self-love.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. It's the self-awareness piece, but it's also the language we use. And let me give a few statistics, and then it's a piece of language that you use that I want people to hear about. But really quick, y'all, I pulled these statistics, this information from NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness, but it's NAMI for short. But 1 in 5 United States adults experience mental illness. 1 in 5, think about that. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness. 21% of all adults. And then when we look at the African American community, 17%. So we have a very high rate, a pretty moderate rate of individuals in our community that experience mental health concerns, yet we find it a taboo topic to discuss. But then we look at some more severe issues: 8% depression, 1% obsessive compulsive disorder, 4% post-traumatic stress disorder. Think about our veterans, and I wish Bernetta could join us, but the veterans in different communities that go through rape are different types of things that create post-traumatic stress. But one of the things... What's that?
They're not being diagnosed. I said the projects, they're not being diagnosed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have
hearing
people
shootings
who are
or having someone murder in front of you.
Well, hell, the thing that gets me, and what I want to come back to is language, but the thing that gets me, and I'm not going to harp on, I'm not being a pessimistic person, but I want our community to do a better job of taking care of us and recognizing that we have value, but we also have shit we got to deal with. And we don't like to deal with the dirty stuff. We don't like, this what we call dirty laundry. We don't like to deal with our dirty laundry. We rather somebody else handle it or just get swept under the rug. It's what our elders used to do. Don't go out and embarrass our family name. Deal with it. It's in front of us. It's not embarrassing, because if we don't deal with it, it's going to create problems down the road that are going to be very, very much more. So deal with it now. Let's find treatment. Let's support people. That's the word we need to be thinking about. Support people and stop being afraid and stop letting what other people think guide your way to progress. But the thing I like that you use is that you talk about living with, not I have. We so often want to say, I have this, I have that. It doesn't have us. We live with.
Right. I agree, because it's in language. Language creates our world. So just like I never say I struggle with or I'm mentally ill. I say my mental wellness. Or I thrive with. Someone gave me that too. I thrive with mental health. But I'm not mentally ill and I'm not suffering, because that's the question. Are you suffering? I had someone say, you're not praying enough. You didn't pray to God to end your mental illness. And I said, well, I feel like this is my calling. God gave me my purpose. And it looks like mental health. And that's a concept that some people can't get. Like, everyone's in this fix-it stage. I'm not fixing. I spent a lot of time trying to fix me. Not changing me. I spent a lot of time trying to change me. I'm healing me, I'm growing me, I'm developing me, but that's a whole different conversation than fixing and changing. So I thrive with mental health. I live with mental health. I accept my mental health. I'm responsible inside of my mental health, and my mental health doesn't do anything to me. I remember at an NA meeting, someone said, if you don't F with it, it ain't gonna F with you. And that's how I look at my
That's
health.
a t-shirt. You know, it's interesting to me that people, you talk about the word fix it. I'm always in amazement that some people think they got it all together. Nobody has it all together. We all had a different starting line. Your finishing line is when you go into that box or you're cremated. It's what you do between those 2 points that create your you. You know, I
What
think
you
we've
gonna do
heard
with
this
that,
from,
Dad?
yeah, what you're gonna do with your you. You know, every day you live, you write your own obituary. Whatever you want that thing to say, it's up to you.
Mm.
If you want to go out there and be a stripper, be the best stripper you can, but guess what? You're writing your obituary. And we're gonna stop. We're gonna step. Look, I can't. They say I can't dance.
Maya Angelou, she had a
I never made
problem.
money in
Come
that
on
arena.
now. So when Robert's also my campaign manager. So when that one nurse's costume picture resurfaces, we know where it came from. We got that one picture.
Right. And it's fundraising season. But you know, nobody's perfect.
I was a
Nobody
waitress.
look. Even Joe Biden, Barack Obama, they're not the most put together people. They just know how to manage and adjust and code switch and to be present where they are. Let me go back to our statistics because I'm very alarmed when we mentioned the prison system, the jail system, which is so off whack. And if we have our criminal justice folks watching, whether you be an attorney, an officer, officer of the court, change the damn criminal system. It's not what it should be. It's not about the money. But anyway, I'm not going to go that route.
Hold
About
on, I've
two.
got one more thing before you go into the statistics.
Okay.
Our mental health hospitals have to stop forcing plea deals.
Oh yeah,
Plea
that's
deals
bad.
in the stigma of mental health by not forcing plea deals. When you're in a mental health hospital and they take you into those programs every single day, they teach you about court procedures and about plea deals every day. So if you're there for an entire year, you're only taught about plea deals instead of being innocent. They don't even give you that. Stop forcing stigma.
In my personal opinion, too, plea deals, pleading basically, was made for a certain community. I'm not going that route. That's a whole different conversation. But if you are in a certain income bracket, a certain zip code, they want you're given a plea deal. But if you live over on the landings on Buckhead, okay, let me read these stats. I ain't going there. They come But about 2 million times each year, people with serious mental illnesses are booked in jails. 2 million cases of that. So you got a mental illness, we're just gonna throw you in jail because we don't want to be bothered. That's what that says. 2 in 5 people who are incarcerated have a history of mental illness. A history, so it's still undiagnosed. 66% of women in prison reported having a history of mental illness, which is twice that of men. What is the comment? 1 in 4 people shot and killed by the police officers, which we saw 2 days ago in Louisiana, had a mental health condition.
He wasn't
Let me keep
shot. He
going.
was just beat.
I'm gonna come back to that. 70% of youth in juvenile justice system have a diagnosable mental health condition. And this is the one that irks my nerves. About 50,000 veterans are held in local jails because of mental illness. We have lost our damn minds. We've lost it. We're going to basically what we have done is we have continued this narrative that mental illness is a bad thing and that those people should be put in the closet because we don't want to see them.
Right.
Huh? Like, come on, folks. And let me talk about the youth one. And I'm speaking directly to my fellow Black folks in America. Don't ever let somebody tell you that your child is bad or has a mental health illness or are special. They're not. They're not challenged enough. They're smarter than the other kids. It's one that you should let Gregory in the room. Gregory is Spider-Man, but the boy is smart. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your child has a problem, a mental problem. No, that child is just not challenged, and they're likely smarter than the other kids in the room. But because they're brown, the teachers don't want you to realize that.
So Gregory is really smart, and I'm taking my child to therapy, because I noticed that there's some things that go on, like, I don't know what he was exposed to in foster care, and I'm going to take him to therapy. However, when you live into conversations, what that thing, what you resist persists, but it's also the law of attraction. So I refuse to just continuously live in the conversation of my kids being traumatized. Because when I asked Bryce, and Bryce should have been traumatized, we slept in the airport together when he was Gregory's age. And when I first got diagnosed, and Bryce was like, "What? Mom, I got PlayStations, I got iPhones. What are you talking about? I'm a regular kid, like traumatized. You think I'm depressed? I just don't want to talk to you." So it's like, but I have open dialogue with my kids. I have a very open, transparent relationship with my kids. I've told my 16-year-old, my only job in life has been to not F it up. And I don't know if I've gotten that right because there's no real measurement. When I woke up this morning, I woke up to my son showing me a video of a police officer harassing a black man because they said he had meth on him that was crushed up, and it was really a little tube of his daughter's remains, and he went hysterical, like, "That's my daughter. She just died a couple of days ago. That's her remains. That's my daughter. That's my daughter." And they started laughing about it, and that's what I woke up to. That's my 16-year-old's reality. So I have to, as a parent, put in place measures to protect his mental health and to protect his identity. I have a 5'11" dreadlock having brown skin, brown boy, and he would be considered a threat to society, and he's educated. So in being educated, when he's not being challenged, they'll give him labels. I remember telling one of his teachers, I spank, I used to spank. I said, I spank, and if you know this, because I told the teacher, I said, you sent my son home telling me he disrupted the class, he got thrown out of class, all this other stuff. I said, and it was you, I will come to that school and whoop your butt. And she was like, but she stopped that foolishness of labeling my child. And I'm not advocating that, because that ends up being terrorist threats and aggravated assault and the violent piece of mental health. And I was off my meds during that time, but I had that conversation because these teachers, Robert is a good example of a professor who cares, but these teachers will label your kids, they'll put them in boxes, and they'll stunt their growth and put them in this prison pipeline, because nobody wants someone that's 25 years old still in the 11th grade, which is, a little far-fetched, but it's real. These kids are 21, graduating high school. Where do they go to work when they're 6'4" and a little thick and darker in complexion, or even light in complexion, when they feel you're a threat? That's colorism, but it exists in America. So when they feel that you're a threat, your intellect or the way that you look, where do you go?
Oh, yeah. And we're about to wrap it up in a moment, but we got to do a part to this. But, I work in higher education. I want to kind of go off with what you were saying. My career has been in higher education. What that means is I work with programming around diversity, equity, and inclusion, multiculturalism. So I deal with students when I was in that profession, and I'm hoping to go back soon on a daily basis. But it's one of the reasons why I'm very, 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 this is my child, y'all. Say hi and go sit down, child. But one of the reasons why I'm very, very, I have high expectations for African-American males on campus is because America doesn't. And any of the males that I work with, and most of the females too, if they act out, or if they do something, or if they're failing, or something's not right, I'm not going to make them feel bad. But what I'm going to do is say, come in that room, and you're going to have a few 4-letter words, and I'm going to tell you how F up you are, and you're going to tighten up. And if you don't, I'm going to make sure that your life is miserable. And that's because when you leave these walls of this academy, ain't nobody else society says. And as a black male, if you get pulled over out there tomorrow, you may not live, and that's the reality of it. Look at, if you want to know this, look in the news. I think in Louisiana, you shared this with me last night, where another young man was killed over some dumb stuff. It is what it is, and we gotta as a community, we still have not gotten it, and the it is, if we don't start thinking about these issues, financial, legacy, mental health, a number of things. We keep pedaling down the road and honor to our ancestors, but some of the ancestors didn't have it right. So it's time to change the formula. You know, it's time to think different. It's time to do some things a little different. Um, but yeah, so we'll close out, but we definitely got to do a part two to this, because one of the things I definitely want to expand on is how we've got to stop warehousing individuals. Senator Warnock said this best when he campaigned. We warehouse more people in America than any other country. And I believe a big portion of that is because we don't want to deal with mental health. One of the great things that I think Savannah Police Department has done, damn sure ain't crime, and I'm not throwing no slights, but again, we need to go to this idea of stop worrying about folks doing their business or whatever they got going on. Worry about these crimes and stop putting people in jail for stuff they ain't got no business in jail for. And that's one of them is mental health. To stop jailing people for nonviolent crimes, and that's across the board. That's everywhere. But one of the good things that we do here at Savannah is we have a cavalry of officers trained to respond to individuals who might be in a compromised position, and that officer understands how to address or navigate through that mental health concern. It's one of the things I know you've been advocating for and working for as well.
Yes, I'm actually advocating for inside of my platform. I'm advocating for mental health first aid training and trauma-informed care training to all members of law enforcement. That looks like the police and that looks like fire department, first responders, because I think that if we get a hold of and we can understand, it lessens the fear. I think that's what goes on between the blacks and the white people. Black people have a fear with white people have a fear of black people, and we're all arguing over who's the superior culture and race. So when we stop the stigmas in life and start to understand, we unravel the mystery. And right now the mystery is called mental health. And how do we end this stigma? And when the police and fire departments can learn this is mental health on display, then the crime rate will decrease.
We have a question, and I want to address it before we leave. And then if you could talk a little bit about your work and your business and Brunetta's work, that'll be a great way to kind of segue out. But Cheryl says, I don't have any statistics or medical background, so please pardon my ignorance. And I don't think it's ignorance. We're all learning. But mental health interventions effective? I'm basing my question only on PTSD observation.
So I don't have any stats, and my medical background comes with lived experience plus certification. And interventions are always effective. Well, let me rephrase it. Always is too general. Intervention is effective. And the reason why intervention is usually 9 times out of 10 effective, I have a statistic, Cheryl. So let me say it like this. I lead groups, and they're in a 90-day program around drug and substance abuse, which is considered mental health, and it's effective. It's an intervention. When you deal with mental health and you have conversations, therapy, you can look up the statistics on therapy and see if it's effective. Talk therapy is effective. You can look at a 12-step module and see that it's one of the most effective modules ever created. It's effective. You can look at some of these growth and development programs and see how effective they are. And I'm saying that even with the PTSD, talking it out makes it effective. And in talking it out, you get, like, I was raped at 24. I think it was 24. And I have to go back to thinking because I've done enough healing work where I don't even remember some of the stuff. And that's because I spent 3 years in therapy behind it. So talking it out with a therapist one day out the week made it effective, made the healing start. You know, we don't get to the other side of healing until we at least acknowledge it, acknowledge that there's something going on, something that's broken, something that's not right. And it doesn't mean that you're broken as an individual. It just realize that there's something that's not connected. And without a connection point, you have to figure out how to get from here to here. And you can't do that on your own. So finding out who can fill that gap for you. And it could be a big mama, like back in the day. You know, you had the person in a community that you could just go talk to. Just find you somebody. It may be when it's a sounding board. I have a sounding board. I have a paraprofessional. I have a therapist. I have a psychologist. I have a life coach, you know, and I have Robert. I mean, I'm in good hands, but I had to realize that it takes that much. Some people, it doesn't take all of that. But with me, I'm a very interesting individual. And although I'm peaceful now, some days I'm not like this. And it takes that much. And it takes having people around me who are caring and compassionate and who can hold that space for me to be great. And everyone doesn't have that. So interventions, make sure that whoever's intervening, that they are being effective and they're holding the space for you to be great instead of living into the trauma. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I hope that I did. And Ivan, I'm running for East Point Ward B at Large City Council. And that's in East Point, Georgia.
And so our engineer, and I want to thank Crystal for her work today. A lot of times we have behind the scenes folks that make this thing successful, and thank you, Crystal. But it's time for us to close out. So what are your closing comments? We'll come back. We're going to do a part 2 to this. You know, Julius and I have a good track record of having part 2s of these things. So we must come down to journalists. But if you could give us your closing thoughts for today, but we'll definitely do a part 2 and talk more about Bernetta's piece and yours as well. But what are your closing thoughts for today?
Okay, so my closing thoughts are not going to be me talking about my company or me running for office. Those are great. And my closing thoughts are, you know you better than you or anyone else. Like, you know you better than the outside you. You know who you are when you are at home and there's no one else there but you. So when you're interacting with that person, you have to ask, am I well? Am I well to who I portray myself to be? Am I well to who society says that I am? And start living to be that person. Even if it means getting up, getting out of bed a little earlier to get in the shower, taking the time to make your bed, taking the time to cry, taking the time to do whatever it takes for you to heal. Because there's power in healing. And healing looks different for everyone. And it does not show up all at one time. You've lived to the point that you're at. Be easy, be gentle, be kind to yourself, and do the work to heal.
Yeah, thank you for appearing. We'll definitely have you back many more times. But my closing thoughts are to the community. And, you know, as a community, wherever you are, this could be a local community, state community, what have you, church community. But let's start being supportive to people. Our goal, in my personal opinion, our goal for being on earth is to prosper, be successful in whatever that looks like for us. And that takes support. But support does not look like rumors. Support does not look like trying to tear someone down. Support does not look like one-upping the person. Support does not look like putting people in incarcerated positions for non-violent crimes. Support looks a little different to me. And that means being present, meeting people where they are, and being helpful. And I think if we do a little more of that, we can all change the narrative and stop being judgmental and making people feel comfortable to be who they are and to express who they are and to seek the resources that will make them thrive in life. So with that, y'all, we're going to close out. We'll see you next Saturday. I believe Julius will be back with us. And we look forward to seeing you all every Saturday. As Alicia Blakely would say, share, share, share on social media. And we will see you all next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Here.